Hi all, welcome back to Microbiology Lectures. And this lecture we're going to discuss more of the innate immune response or innate immune system. And this time we're going to talk about something that's kind of often forgot about. I guess maybe over the last 10 to 20 years we think about it a lot more, but prior to that we really didn't think about the role that your native microbiota plays in defending against foreign entities, foreign bodies that are coming in. And so, as many of you know, we have native microbiota across our entire body. Okay, that's not just your intestinal tract or your digestive tract, but also on your skin, in your mouth, nostrils, like all over. We have native microbiota, and when I say native, meaning that a lot of these were picked up early on in life. So either in the womb, through breastfeeding, through interactions with parents, siblings. These early life interactions dictate kind of your native biota typically. Okay? And so there are a couple ways at which they can defend against invaders. And so one way is what we typically call competitive exclusion. And that means you don't allow for the new invaders to become established by either producing toxins that will not allow them to come, to take foot, maybe taking the nutrients, consuming all the available nutrients so things can't become established, maybe changing the chemistry around or in a given region. All these kind of things can make it not a very nice region or a habitable region for the pathogens to take foot. Okay, so certain things like Cutibacterium, they degrade lipids and produce fatty acids. So often the Cutibacterium will, if a pathogen comes close to them, they will produce a enzyme that degrades the lipid membrane of that pathogen. Okay, E. coli. We talk about E. coli from a negative sense often, but E. coli plays a very important role in your intestinal tract. E. coli is a species of bacteria that can become established and do well when oxygen is present. And so the top portion of your intestinal tract, you'll often find E. coli. And the kind of the benefit of having E. coli in that region is it consumes a lot of the oxygen and allows for the parts of the intestinal tract that come after to be oxygen free. And this is where those anaerobic bacteria that break down and further degrade the nutrients so we can absorb them often occur. And so without E. coli in that region, it means oxygen would travel further down in the intestinal tract, and a lot of those bacteria that are anaerobic and can't work and oxygen is toxic to them would die off also. So not only would you kill the E. coli, you'd kill the beneficial anaerobic bacteria. And so they often will synthesize cholinesterase, which prevents things from getting established in that region. Lactobacillus is a bacteria group that is associated, often we think it's associated with the vagina, but it's also associated with your skin and your mouth. And it produces an environment that lowers the pH. And so it actually increases the acidity in a given region. Okay? And you might think, well, what's the benefit of that? Well, if you can increase the acidity outside of the range that pathogens can get established, then and lactobacteria can survive, and it's not harming you, then it limits the number of pathogens that can come in. Okay? And we know a lot about some of these because when we use a lot of antibiotics, we kill our native biota. Okay? So antibiotics in general are not species specific. They might attack the peptoglycan layer. They might attack the formation of cell membranes, or how, or whether or not DNA can multiply. And so, because that is somewhat general, when you take an antibiotic, it attacks lots of different species of bacteria in your system. And if you take lots of antibiotics, it can start deteriorating your native biota that we're keeping the pathogens away. And so when we see that things like E. coli gets removed from the system, Clostridium can replace it, okay, which can cause chronic diarrhea symptoms and upset stomach and just poor digestive processes. Okay, and then lots of individuals are familiar with Candida albicans, and because this is a species of fungi that causes yeast infection. And so, yes, we often talk about a yeast infection being in the vagina, but a yeast infection can also occur in other regions that lactobacillus occur in, and that's your mouth. So this is like a yeast infection in the mouth. This can also occur in armpits. It can occur on your face. Lactobacillus is very common across the human body, and it lowers pH so that things like Candida albicans cannot get established. When you remove it due to antibiotic use, then this yeast fungi can be established and cause problems by deteriorating and consuming your nutrients in your tissue. All right, let's talk about the cell of the immune system. It's that kind of third layer. So you have your first layer is your skin, kind of mucus. Your second layer is all the chemicals, right? And sometimes we'll stick your native biota in that chemical because they're often producing chemicals to keep pathogens at bay or keep the pathogen numbers down. And then kind of that last line of the innate immune system is the cells that seek and destroy. Okay? And we have two kind of general groupings of the cells. Okay? You have, at least in mammals, in the bone marrow, you have hematopoietic stem cells. Okay? So these are cells that are not differentiated. Okay? So depending on the signal needed, the number of the region that might need cells will determine what these cells eventually become. If they become a myeloid progenitor, then as far as the white blood cells go, it's going to be a granulocyte. Okay? Or, if you're low on red blood cells, it'd be a erythrocyte, or if you need more platelets, okay, it's going to be a thrombocyte. But that's the myeloid progenitor side. Okay? If it's a lymphoid progenitor, then it's going to be the white blood cells that we often call lymphocytes or related to lymphocytes. And so and that's more the adaptive immune response. And so the two kind of processes: a myeloid progenitor, innate immune response; the lymphoid progenitor, adaptive immune response. Okay. We'll cover these in a little more detail. Sometimes mast cells are actually lumped under granulocytes. Mast cells are just like basophils. I'm not entirely sure which one evolved first, but it's pretty clear that one gave rise to the other, or vice versa. Mast cells are very similar to basophils, except for mast cells don't occur in the bloodstream. They only occur in tissue. They have the same function, okay, to engulf, to phagocytize foreign bodies, pathogens, material that's foreign, and then use digestive enzymes to break it down, okay, and then present that material as antigens to your adaptive immune response. Okay? Same thing that as eosinophils, basophils, and neutrophils do. Very similar process. Okay, digestive enzymes. That's what the granules are. Is digestive enzymes, and they'll break down proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, cleave them off, and then present them to the adaptive immune response. Okay, so let's dive into these guys a little bit more. Okay, so granulocytes are these groups of cells that often look like they have multiple nuclei. First of all, sometimes they're actually called multinuclear granulocytes. They don't actually have to have multiple nuclei, but one common characteristic of these cells is that they have lobed nuclei. So they might have projections off their nuclei that sometimes they can be multinuclear. But anyways, so they have these cytoplasmic granules. Those granules are where they house things like peroxisomes and lysosomes and other enzymes that will break down material, foreign body. Okay, so when those granules are released, we often call them degranulation. So sometimes this can happen in a couple different ways. Sometimes the granule itself can be pumped into the foreign body or released onto the foreign body. Sometimes this happens when granulocytes attack things like parasitic worms. They don't actually engulf the parasitic worm, but they'll surround it and then basically spit digestive enzymes and degranulate all over the parasitic worm. For things like neutrophils, they're known to attack bacteria. They're known to degrade bacteria, break them down, and then present that bacterial, typically proteins, that's probably the best, present that as an antigen to the adaptive immune system. Basophils, like I kind of already talked about a little bit before, basophils are often very active during allergic reactions. So they react to things, sometimes things that are not living, and so reaction to things like pet dander or fur, reactions to living things like pollen, these kind of things are normally associated with the basophils. Okay, and we know their granules contain histamine, and so often this is why people who have severe allergy attacks often will take an antihistamine, which kind of it dampens or lowers the ability for basophils to react to certain things in the environment. That'd be pollen or whatever the individual might be heavily allergic to. Okay, the antihistamine would be given to try to basically make the basophils less effective. Mast cells are like basophils, like I said before, but they're found in the tissue, and so this is also going to be associated with rashes and inflammation and swelling and things like that. A mast cell will react to allergic reactions. If you're allergic to, like poison ivy, poison oak, or something like that, you'll have mast cells that flow into that region, and they're found in those tissues. Okay. Eosinophils are often associated with parasitic worms and even protozoans, and so they're often attacking things that are larger. So maybe they are not phagocytizing. Sometimes they do, but they're not phagocytizing as often, and they're the ones that are going to be degranulating onto the organism. Interestingly about eosinophils, there's pretty good evidence that eosinophils or overactive eosinophils may be the result of certain disorders, I guess you could call them diseases, like Crohn's and other intestinal issues, because eosinophils used to fight, they evolved to fight off parasitic worms and attack things like tapeworms and gut flukes and things like that. But especially in the developed part of the world, where we cook all our foods, we don't have a lot of the parasitic worms. We also tend to treat our water with chemicals to prevent things like Giardia and other things from being in the water source. So a lot of the intestinal tract parasites are gone, but the eosinophils aren't gone. They're genetically controlled. You have them. For some people, what seems to be happening, especially in developed countries, we don't see things like Crohn's in developing countries, which have a lot of parasitic worms still, but we see in developed countries, we see the development of Crohn's, which is basically your immune system attacking your own intestinal tract. And that is probably directly related to the eosinophils that were once used to fight parasitic worms, but are now, for a lack of a better term, bored. They're not inactive. They do their job when you get a parasitic worm, but often their response is not needed because we're not encountering them as often anymore. Okay, and so for those of you like watching, you can go to these links. I'm not going to, otherwise YouTube takes me off for plagiarism, and so you can check out these other YouTube links.